Greetings, my name is Blaze. Welcome to my channel. So there's been a new book that has been published by Lucas Miles called The Pagan Threat. And there has been, of course, a little bit of stir in the community, the New Age, neo-pagan community, where folks are a little concerned about this, and I think with good reason. So I wanted to make this video primarily for Christians and some pagans. On a whole, though, I think this could apply to anyone. My main point that I want to bring up, which I will then articulate with different examples, is the idea of centering out a group based upon a generic label and trying to classify people as a threat, I think is a dangerous mindset to have. At the end of the day, we are all humans. We're children of the earth. Regardless of what religious background or spirituality we may come from, I think that we need to treat each other as humans and people first, and interact with folks based upon their actions and their words, not labels that they may put on themselves or assumptions that we may make, not understanding where they come from. One of the problems that I see in today's society is people look for excuses to hate or attack each other. And I think books like this that generalize just causes more hate. I don't think that's wise. I want to be very clear. I do not speak for the neo-pagan community. There are some who agree with some of my viewpoints. There are some who do not, which is kind of the whole point. But likewise, the Christian community, not everyone feels the exact same way, which is why you have so many different denominations or even different church groups. People are going to take interpretations and meanings slightly different, and how far they take it is going to change, which is why I don't think anyone should be judged based upon a large umbrella term. So when we talk about stuff like pagan or neo-pagan, when we talk about Christian, it's a very broad generic term. It's a wide brush. And to take the actions of a few extremists and to say, oh, everyone else in this group is the exact same because of these few who are extremists, I don't think is fair to either group. I highly encourage individuals who are neo-pagans to let go of your hatred and stop blaming Christians for everything. Some of the best people I know are Christian. Christians kept a lot of the lore and myths alive for us to study and to reconstruct or to invent our own paths based upon them. We see inspiration from them on a regular basis, and sure, there's going to be some bad seeds, some bad apples. We have seen throughout history Christians do things that are violent. You know, we've seen bombings of Planned Parenthoods. We've seen people burned at the stake. We've seen the Inquisition. We've seen horrible acts. That's not every Christian. And most Christians preach and teach against hatefulness and instead love for your fellow human being. Likewise, within the neo-pagan community, you'd be surprised how many individuals actually share a lot of the same morals and values as the Christians do. At the end of the day, they love life and they revere nature. And if you really think about it from a Christian perspective, God created everything. They're just loving God's creation. So again, that's the main message that I want to bring across. What I would like to go through next is I want to read a few excerpts from the book. I did not read or purchase the entire book, Pagan Threat. I've read the foreword, I've read a few pages, and then I have a friend in Discord who's actually purchased the book and is reading it cover to cover and is sharing some snippets with me. And what I'm seeing is, again, just a generalization, just tossing everything under the term pagan today as being essentially extreme leftism. I don't even think people on the right or the left are that bad, and I would even argue that most people are in the middle. They just have a tendency to lean one side or the other. What I think this book does not account for is a few things. First of all, the conservative pagan, or the individual who mixes and meshes things and includes things from a Christian mindset. It acts like these people do not exist, which is why I'm saying this is such a severe way of painting people. I myself do not identify as pagan, even though if you were to speak with me, and if you look at the terms inside of the Pagan Threat book, I would definitely fall under some of those umbrella categories. I myself am very much eclectic in the sense that I mix and mash and blend different things. Now, there is a piece in this book that I'll comment on in a minute, but when I mix things together, I try to do so from a traditional historical standpoint. I try to look for historical sources or actual practices and blend those in. Yes, ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm making up my own mind, but that's largely what I do. I also have a very monistic viewpoint where I kind of view everything as interconnected. One way of articulating this to someone who is Christian, God is in everything. The kingdom of God is within us. We are literally all connected. We are literally touching the divine. We are alive and aware. If you want to look at Genesis, that when God said, "Let us create them in our image," I believe that is our mind, not our bodies. Our bodies are just shells, they're vessels for what we really are, our spirit or soul. And that spirit and soul, that awareness, that is what being in the image of God is, in my opinion. There's also an animistic viewpoint that I have where I kind of feel there is a sacredness and divinity within all of creation. Again, if you think about it from a Christian perspective, that's like saying God created everything, God is in everything. Doesn't mean you have to agree with that, but that's just me sharing my personal path. And lastly, I am polytheistic in my viewpoint. I think this is a reflection of showing how much beyond our comprehension the divine is. I say the divine. That's typically what I say, but I believe what I call the divine is what the Christians are calling God. In Taoism, they would refer to it as the Tao. It's this unknowing, it's not an entity, it's something beyond entity. It's this force, this presence, this omnipotent, omnipresent existence. And I am human, so I can be wrong about things. And I can change my mind, and I do. I constantly try to evolve and change my mind and learn, so I'm willing to have open conversations and evaluate things as they come through. That's just a little bit about it. I'm going to go and talk about later in this video some of the moralities that I have that actually mesh well with Christianity, again, from a conservative viewpoint. So even though I do not consider myself to be pagan or neo-pagan, my path would probably fall more under that than it would under any of the other names that are out there. So let's talk about a few of these excerpts. The first thing I want to bring attention to is the foreword, which was written by Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is someone I greatly respected. And in my personal beliefs, which I'll get into later, is I find all life sacred. Him dying was an absolute tragedy, and it was heartbreaking to see someone lose their life. Not only because he was a human being, right? I view all of us as children of the earth. We're earthlings, we're here from earth. All of us are the same. We're brothers and sisters. Sure, we have different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. We were born in different areas. We have different ages or whatnot. But at the end of the day, we're all one big family. So anyone losing their life to me is tragic. Charlie hit particularly hard for me because I watched and enjoyed his videos. I agreed with a lot of what he said. I didn't agree with everything he said, but I agreed with a lot of what he said. And the one thing that I loved the most about his videos is he was always willing to have a conversation. He was willing to put the mic into the hands of someone who didn't agree with him and have an open discussion. And I like to believe and convince myself, maybe I'm wrong, I believe he would have at least talked to me and heard me out. Him writing this forward is upsetting. Doesn't make me hate him or mad at him. I disagree with him. This is an example of me disagreeing with him. But I would like to think that if he was still with us, he would be willing to hear me out and at least have a conversation. With that being said, the pieces I want to draw attention to, and you can find this, like I said, you can look at the preview on Amazon as an example if you wanted to look it up. One of the things he said, we are menaced, and again, this is written by him in the foreword, which was by Charlie Kirk. The rest of the book was by Lucas Miles. We are menaced not by new false gods, by the return of demons from long ago. And then this other part, he says, in the pagan world, the individual human life was of no importance. Therefore, abortion, infanticide, human sacrifice, and more were just a part of life. Under paganism, there was no notion that humans had equal innate worth. So one tribe enslaved another, or rulers enslaved their subjects, all with impunity. And then there's another section here where it talks about the rival of these Old Testament times is exactly what this book, Pagan Threat, Confronting America's Godless Uprising, confronts. Casual Christians like to imagine we have already won a permanent victory over the worshippers of Moloch, Baal, and Jupiter, but those gods are now back with a vengeance, bearing new names like progressivism, tolerance, and social justice. So the reason I want to draw attention to a few of these things is to paint this picture that the gods that individuals like myself look to are demons. This overgeneralization of it's always demons. A lot of us that are within this community, which it's not a community, there's not like an overruling head. People personalize this. And that's one of the biggest problems to paint with such a wide brush. People personalize their spiritual experience. Some of them take it in a religious place, some of them do not. Many of us, again, do not speak for everyone, view the gods, the deities, as personifications of nature itself. To paint this in a picture, which I think would mesh with a Christian ideology, if you think of God through the Catholic faith, they have the Catechism of the Catholics, and they talk about God as being a formless, genderless being that is like beyond our comprehension. So we'll typically say God the Father within the Christian context because God is a personal being. God is not an it. But God is genderless, based upon many Christians that I've looked into. If God is omnipresent and part of all things, we can't comprehend or wrap our head around that. I believe that each of the deities and different divine beings are our attempt to wrap our heads around something we cannot comprehend. So when we look inside of nature, which many of us view as literally a manifestation in this world of the divine essence, the divine power of God itself, himself, herself, of God, then these are different aspects of it. Another way of looking at it is we use the term gods and goddesses today. Those are not the terms that were used by ancient peoples. Instead, these could very well just be angelic beings for all we know. These could be essences or things created by God to interact with us since we can't comprehend the glory of God. That is one way of looking at it. Does that necessarily work? No. But to instantly take anything that is not understood and to reduce it to demons, I find both problematic and just incorrect and inaccurate. The other part here, talking about the pagan world and individuals like having no reverence or importance for human life, etc., this again is also inaccurate. So the first thing I need to point out here is let's look at the actual word pagan. Pagan comes to us from Latin, from a combination of two different words, pagani and paganus. It essentially referred to individuals who lived out in the wilderness, out in the sticks. It's like today saying country folk, or redneck or whatever. You're talking about someone who's living out on farmland, kind of doing their own thing. When Christianity was first spreading, it spread through the cities. So the people who were educated in the cities and part of the know, they were learning about the new religion. But people out in the sticks, out in the country, the pagani, the paganos, they were out there doing their own thing. So their pagan practices were the old ancestral, old traditions, not including the teachings of the church. That's where a lot of it started, and it became a slur to refer to anyone who was not part of one of the Abrahamic faiths. Eventually, in some of the new Reconstruction stuff, people started to reclaim that term to denote anyone who is not part of an Abrahamic faith today, and now it refers to a variety of practices. I think one of the problems that both neo-pagans today do as well as Christians is they project. They assume anything pre-Christian is pagan. So any practice done outside of a Christian nation is a pagan practice, and that's just not accurate. Not to mention the fact that a lot of individuals today who are trying to reconstruct or even revive, usually it's a reconstruction, they're not trying to revive ancient pagan practices of slaughter and sacrifice and things like that. The different regions, even within the Christian areas, if you look at the Bible and you look through different stories, different things like slavery or servitude or killing and butchering and sacrificing of animals is prevalent throughout some of these texts because that was the worldview. That's what the world did. We moved away from that. So to instantly assume that modern pagans are trying to do things like that, again, is reductive and doesn't look at the full experience. You are taking examples from the past. It would be the equivalent of me looking back at the book of Genesis and looking at Abram when he basically was talking to God and trying to get like the covenant of him having his children. He has no children but Sarai. So he takes animals and splits them down the middle, 3 of them, and walks through their entrails as part of the covenant. That's something that's horrific, I think, by anyone's standards. Christians don't do that today. We don't think Christians do that today. So again, to take some of the worst practices and assume that they're applied to everyone is an oversimplification and generalization. Not to mention the fact that we have historical evidence of many of these tribal and clan groups that were very family oriented, that they did revere life. Yes, there's some truth to this. When you had different clans and tribes fighting, whoever won got to do whatever they want, whether it was take your life, take you as a servant, take you as property, take your goods and your possessions. They pretty much did whatever they want, where might ruled. But that wasn't specifically pagan. That was how human tribal society worked, which is why Christianity has been praised by many, including myself, because the civilized world was built out of Christian, or at least Judeo-Christian values. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So again, to take this overall generalization and assumption, this is not true of pagans today, or at least not all pagans. There's always going to be exceptions. But you're also generalizing and assuming everyone who was quote-unquote pagan or not Christian did this, and that's just not the case, considering Christians did some of this as well. In fact, some of the Inquisition stuff, like I said, which I do not hold modern Christians responsible for, showed that they had no value for human life. They devalued, demonized, and inhumanized people that they justified their attacks on. This is not what we should do as a civilized society, and we have moved away from finally, and hopefully never return to. The next part, talking about the progressivism, tolerance, and social justice. I think there's a balance there. So I think most humans on a whole want to treat people fairly. They want there to be justice. When people do some of the left activism, wokeism, as they keep calling it, the extremists are the problem. I think at the general root, people have a good goal, good heart in mind. They're trying to get people to be treated equally. The problem is their approach ends up either taking it to the other extreme. Some people seem to think this group was targeted and treated unfairly, so we'll do the exact same thing, but we'll do it to this group who used to do it in the past. Not only are you holding people of the present responsible for those of the past, but by doing the exact same thing makes you just as bad. It's just the same complaint I have for people who are born Christian but move away and become a neo-pagan. They are hating on Christians, and they're doing the same thing they complain that the Christians did to them that made them leave to begin with. If you're doing the same thing, you're just as bad. That's my opinion, and I'm going to stick to it. Doing things that are considered wrong and bad doesn't change because you change the field or the side that you're playing for. Wrong is wrong. So yeah, just this generalization and just putting it all together, it does not fit. It does not fit with most of the conservative pagans that are out there. Now, moving on to some of the stuff that was written specifically by Lucas Miles. I don't know Lucas Miles, so I'm not doing a huge judgment on him, but he's putting out these thoughts and ideas, which I think, again, is going to divide society. We, again, are humans, people together. We need to come together. We need to stop fighting and targeting each other. And putting this idea of threat or making a group a threat to be targeted is not something we need in our society. So I'm speaking out against this idea of making an opposing side when instead I think we could find unity and middle ground. And again, paint us all as this far left individuals that are just extremists. And just to be clear, there's extremists on the right too. Any extremist group is bad. Within religious context, you have your extremists inside of Christianity that are bad. You also have your people that kind of half-ass it and they claim they're Christian and they don't really follow Christian doctrine, morals, or teachings. Those are just as bad too. Same thing exists within the neo-pagan community. It's a broad category, but those who are extremists are bad. Those who are half-assing it are bad. People in the middle who are moderate have a tendency to be less extreme. So painting us all as extremists is the problem that I'm having here. In the introduction, he says, the seemingly innocuous rise of social justice and inclusivity movements has laid the groundwork for a full-blown revival of ancient pagan beliefs. And then in the next paragraph here, the connection between woke ideology and paganism is not merely a coincidence, but a natural progression. Behind the emphasis on identity politics, intersectionality, and racial inclusivity within the wokeism lies centuries-old pagan ideologies. Again, just painting this picture of the far left with all of paganism. This, of course, explains the zeal with which wokeism is promoted, just as the pagans of old were devoted to their gods and rituals. Today's woke adherents are fervent to their devotion to the new dogma of gender identity, critical race theory, and earth worship. So a couple things to pick apart in this section specifically. this woke ideology are taking the extremeness. There is this intermediate piece. There is a fairness. Reverence of the earth. Yes, most of us pagans revere the earth. We look at the earth as part of existence. So it is sacred and divine. It is created by God. We are created by God. The earth is divine because of its origin. So we revere and respect what was created and given to us, that we are part of, that we are in sync with. And that's what a lot of us are looking for when we turn to some of these new age paths, these neo-pagan paths. We are drawn to the idea of connecting. Now, there are some that I mentioned who turn away from Christianity, that were raised Christian, and they are not finding what they're looking for in the church. What they're looking for varies from person to person, but a lot of people are looking for a stronger connection with God's creation, more respect for it. They felt the rigid interpretations of some of the biblical scholars didn't make sense to them. Some people actually leave the church and return to it. Some people stay away. Some people are drawn to power. Some people are corrupt. They leave the church because it's restrictive. And one of the things with inside of paganism is it's very freeing and unrestrictive. And unfortunately, when you take people and you completely take away all restrictions of any kind or form, some people go to full-blown chaos. And you can see some of the worst of us with inside of the pagan community. It's going to happen, not just pagan, but non-Christian in general. And again, just because you're not Christian does not make you pagan. So again, taking everyone who's extreme left, they're not all pagan. But paganism is popular to some of them because of the idea of I'm going to do what I want, and I answer to only myself. This is part of the problem. One might argue, and some have argued that problem with some of the Protestant movements. They did not want to follow the teachings of the Catholic or Orthodox Church. So instead, they're like, I'm going to interpret the Bible how I want. And some people criticize that type of movement for that, of taking things into their own hand versus looking for that communal group reverence and respect. So yes, a lot of people that are pretty extreme are making the classification of themselves as pagan and painting a really bad picture for folks. And I get that's what we're up against, but that's why I'm making this video, to kind of set the record straight and to let you know that not everybody is like that. The next page I wanted to draw attention to, there's only 2 more pages, and I want to do a couple videos and talk about some of my beliefs. The rise of the other religions. Collectively known as the Harry Potter generation, millennials and Zoomers who grew up with dreams of attending Hogwarts, playing Dungeons and Dragons, or forming friendships through LARPing, which is live action role playing. He clarifies that in here, are no strangers to wizardry and witchcraft. However, an affinity for fantasy isn't the sole factor driving their departure from traditional faiths. Their shared experience of traumatic events also play a role. Chief among these are September 11th, 2001, the alarming increase in school shootings, and the isolation and distinct distrust stemming from the COVID-19 shutdown. So yeah, a lot of individuals who are drawn into this world of what we're calling neo-paganism for the sake of this video, the alternative religions, the alternative spiritual paths, are individuals who are drawn to fantasy. They want to find an escapism, and to escape from the world and find themselves in a world where their mind literally can forge their own reality, which is at the center of a lot of practices, or to reconnect and to leave this world and connect to a higher divine world. People sometimes turn harder into the church for that exact same thing. I know D&D players who are hardcore Christians. One of my friends who plays is a very devout Baptist and has been going to church regularly through his entire life. Great guy, and he loves Dungeons and Dragons. Then you have individuals like myself who play Dungeons and Dragons. I prefer the older versions for various reasons, because of some of the push from the far left ideology that is pushed into the game and taken away. It's just a game. But to paint those together, so many people are making these assumptions with this hobby or this talent or this thing that folks get into, and this is what's pulling them away, and it's a combination of these factors. There's many reasons why people make the choices that they do, but I feel like this is too broad of a brush being painted. Now, I already talked about what paganism was based upon the old Latin words. In here, there's a paganism defined section, which isn't too far off, but again, kind of does it in a nasty way almost. Once considered obsolete, paganism is a blanket term used to describe those who have abandoned mainstream forms of religion for the esoteric practices, often rooted in polytheism, ancient rituals, worship of nature, spellcasting, sexual acts, and altered states of consciousness. Falling under the broad terminology of pagan exists a virtually endless and ever-expanding list of self-identifications such as Wicca, Druidism, occult, heathenism, witchcraft, neo-pagan, shamanism, thelema, theosophy, New Age, New Thought, Baltic, Celtic, Hellenistic, Norse Reconstruction, eclectic paganism, and more. That's not fully wrong, but it's making, again, this generalized assumption and putting them all together. Yeah, some of this stuff of what's being said here is true, and some of it is fairly accurate, but again, how far some of these things get into is debatable. And I guess that's my biggest thing when I'm looking at this. It's like, it's not like everything Lucas Miles is saying is 100% wrong in this book. It's just he's taking the worst examples and acting like that's the whole. And I guess anybody who doesn't like a certain path or a path that's different from their own is going to make these stereotypical, unfair, and justified judgments towards people. Or if you have bad experiences, you assume everyone's the same. The next section that I'm going to break down is he kind of articulated what he felt based upon his research were some of these paths. And I just wanted to briefly talk about those before we get into the rest of the video. Druidism. Quick cut in the video because I had to jump to the section, I forgot to save it, where basically talking about Druidism. Primarily a modern invention, Neo-Druidism emerged at the end of the 8th century Romantic era from the renewed interest in Celtic culture and spirituality. Today, Druid practitioners seek to reimagine, albeit with limited historical and archaeological evidence, the religious paths and rituals of the ancient Druid priestly class, with an added emphasis on nature, cycles of the seasons, and the sacredness of the land. This isn't really far from the truth, but I don't see what the problem is, and I don't see how this clashes or is considered anti-Christian, as some of the sections in this book would claim. In fact, if we look at the Druid reconstruction, because we don't know what the ancient Druids used to do. Like, yeah, we have stuff from Pliny the Elder or, Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. We have myths that were written down by Irish monks because, again, the Christians loved this stuff and kept it alive. And now people are using it as a reconstruction. The first Druids, about 300 years ago, with individuals like Iolo Morganlug, were in fact Christian. The term Druid was used more like philosopher. They took a different approach to Christianity where they put an added reverence for nature and God's creation. It didn't start becoming polytheistic or paganism until maybe about 100 years ago. And then you have some break-off movements from this revival reconstruction stuff. So lumping this together with modern paganism, this is kind of my point. These are very distinct practices. They're not the same. They don't tie together in this neat bow of extreme leftism like Lucas Miles is trying to paint. This other section here that stood out to me was talking about eclectic paganism. Eclectic paganism is a choose-your-own-adventure spiritual approach that draws from various pagan traditions, beliefs, and practices. Like I was saying earlier, with considering myself eclectic, this does pretty well fall into that kind of category. But to say choose your own adventure is trying to berate or belittle the idea of thinking for yourself. Like, thinking for yourself isn't necessarily like the rest of this with what he's saying. So practices and creating a personalized, syncretic path tailored to individual preferences and spiritual needs. For example, an eclectic pagan may worship a Norse deity, cast Wiccan spells, and reconnect with nature through Druidry, all without any need to verify or validate their unique practice through history or ancient religious texts. That last part there is the untrue point of this. Many eclectic individuals do go back to original source material, archaeology, evidence, and even people with doctorate degrees to take into consideration how they want to form or believe how they want to go about it. Or they read religious texts and spiritual texts from other individuals to try to incorporate it into the way they're going to go about it. Because myself, at least speaking for myself in this eclectic mindset, I'm human. I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. So I'm going to individuals who claim to know, and I'm reading and seeing what inspiration I can get. I'm reading the Eddas and Sagas. I'm reading the Irish and Welsh myths. I'm reading the Tao Te Ching, and I'm reading other sacred Taoist texts. I'm reading the Catholic Bible. I'm reading different interpretations of the Bible, because there's different versions besides for just the Catholic edition. And I'm reading about ways of enlightenment, opening your mind. He talks about this stuff like this altered state of consciousness, like as if he doesn't go to church and pray to God and meditate on God, as if he doesn't try to alter his mind from the now and open himself up to the Lord. A lot of the stuff that he's complaining about in this overgeneralization of pagan practice being bad is inherently inside of spirituality, period. The biggest difference on the spirituality is the splitting the hairs over what the divine is, how to properly honor and respect the divine, and what we as humans are accountable for, be it through morality or a moral code or what's right and what's wrong. That's the debate that ends up coming up with this. But at the end of the day, spirituality is spirituality. We'll get into that in just a second. I want to talk about this one last part in the book. Everything is sacred. Detached from the proponents of traditional faith, modern pagans, no matter their identification, redefine Judeo-Christian morality as they seek to reconnect with the ancient ways. Senior editor at the, and then goes in this other stuff. So here's the big thing. And this is what I'm talking about with as far as the conservative pagan goes. We're not all trying to redefine. We're trying to reassess and ask ourselves. There is a universal truth, and all of us are attempting to understand it. All of us are attempting to connect with our divine source and origin and have reverence for things. We're just trying to step back for a second, and instead of having people tell you what that is, seek it out and feel it for yourself. It's about that first-hand experience. Many of us, especially like even with myself, were raised inside of a Judeo-Christian community. So we have a lot of that moral framework from our society and culture, and the world has been slipping away from it. But has it been slipping away from it because of paganism? Or has it been slipping away from it because of a new generation of individuals who feel entitled, who feel betrayed by their government, who don't have a structured home life? Like, what other factors could there be? Why is it instantly the pagans that are responsible, and why are they the threat? So let's go ahead and dig into some of the stuff that I believe in that I think actually relates closely to some of the Christian morality out there, and this would be the biggest shocker. So if you've gotten through this first 30 or so minutes, I salute you. Stick with me. We're not done yet. I want to really quick pay homage to a Orthodox priest, Josiah, I think his name was. So he was on a video with Tucker Carlson. I love Tucker Carlson's content. But Josiah Trenham, Father Josiah Trenham, mentions here, and I'm going to play a quick clip from this America After Charlie Kirk on Tucker Carlson's YouTube. Let me play this clip for you really quick.
Have to repent, and we need someone. Give us, God, someone like a King David. Give us someone like my patron saint, Josiah, who was the last great king of Israel, who himself lived at a terrible time. His father and his grandfather were both awful kings who had completely apostatized, abandoned the heritage of Israel, led the people to copy the pagan practices of the surrounding nations. And forgive me, we're way worse than pagans. I always tell people, look, don't call the secular nonsense that's going on in America pagan. That's an insult to the pagans. The pagans believed in the divine order. They believed in the gods. Okay, we don't believe that there are gods. There is one God. But the pagans at least knew they were accountable to the divine order. They were accountable to the gods, and that they had to live with respect to the wishes of the gods. To call America, which has no reference, most of our leaders make no reference to God at all. They act as though they are not accountable to God's law. And I think that's far, far worse than paganism and a full-blown insult to pagans to call it pagan. No, unless we have a leader who's going to address this, it needs to be addressed, right? Directly. We need to repent, and we need to recover our faith. If we do that, times of refreshing will come from God. You know, if you study the scriptures, there's three types of life that are described in scriptures. There's biological life. In Greek, it's called bios. from where we get biological, right? There's the life of the soul. Many Americans don't even know that that exists. That's called psyche. It's the life, it's the most noble part of you, right? Even the Greek pagans, to use this again, knew that. The body is like a chariot and the soul is like the charioteer, leading the person in nobility, so that the body does virtue. The body does something beautiful, right? If you don't think you have psyche, if you think you're just a body and you don't have a soul, which, by the way, is the worldview of the major tech titans of our country.
Now, I'm not saying that he's praising pagans, but the fact he gets it, he understands that pagans are accountable to a divine order. Yes, it might be slightly different, maybe completely different from the higher order that the Christians are appealing to, but there is a sacredness and a reverence. See, when we start talking about beliefs, one more time, because I haven't said it enough, I don't speak for all neo-pagans. But I guarantee, and if you are watching this and you've gotten through this far and you consider yourself pagan, put your agreements or disagreements below. Here's some of the things that I believe that I think mesh well with inside of Christianity. Now, I do take this from an approach similar to what Lucas Miles is saying. I do try to be more inclusive and more open and understanding of different paths. There are things that I believe, but I don't criticize others for. I need to be responsible for my own actions. When I need to call out someone else is when I see injustice or when I see others suffering because of the actions of others. But if somebody is making a personal choice that I don't agree with, that's their business. Not until it affects me or society does it become a problem. So I do have a more open mindset on that, but some of my values are strictly conservative. Now here's the thing. As I'd mentioned, I'm reading the Bible. I'm actually going through a 365 page by page, every section of the Bible. And I've been doing this every day, going through and reading it. And this is one of the many books that I read because there's wisdom in here. Do I agree with everything? Doesn't matter. I don't, but it doesn't matter. I'm still trying to understand and open myself up to the possibility of wisdom. This is something that has made Christians I know good people, genuinely kind, open-hearted, just loving people. So there's something here. I want to see what it is. I was raised Roman Catholic. I decided to move away from it 30 years ago, and I studied a whole bunch of different spiritual things, different religions, alternative faiths, different practices. Yes, some of them are occult, some of them are arcane, some of them do with spellcraft and nature honoring and all that good stuff. But from what I've looked at here inside the Bible, I don't think that they're enemies or opponents. I think they're different ways of looking at the same thing. When I moved away from Catholicism, at first I was pretty jaded because of things I was told. As an adult, I have a different mindset now, but when I first moved away, I was looking for connection, for a reverence with nature itself, for a better understanding of God. I thought, with the many things that I did, and I'll be open and honest here, and this might be put off for a lot of folks, I was under the impression that I could heal people. And today we call this etheric touch or laying on of hands. So if you want to look those things up. I believed at the time it was a gift from God, but I had a teacher tell me that if you're not healing in Jesus' name, you're using Satan's power. To me, this made no sense. If God created me and God created me with talents and I was exploring those talents and I still had God and Jesus in my heart, why would that not be connected? So I went looking to see if maybe the Catholic Church was too restrictive in the way it viewed God. And then I stumbled upon polytheism and their stuff, and here I am 30 years later. Now I'm looking back and I'm finding a new appreciation for some of the Christian beliefs. I realize that some of the values that I have held since childhood stayed with me. And reading the Bible doesn't feel too far off or too far in left field compared to some of the other stuff that I've read. Some of the spiritualities, I've started looking for what I call universal truths, and I've seen passages inside the Bible that are echoed in other spiritual beliefs and practices. I see them within Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I see different ways of honoring and being noble with the family with some of the I guess you call it Norse Reconstruction stuff now, but any of the Scandinavian Reconstruction stuff, we see a lot of the lore and things that are held within some of the Celtic stuff, like in the Welsh and the Irish traditions, cultures, and customs. Like all of this stuff seems to reflect each other to a degree, and these are the things that I'm calling universal truths. Now, some of the things that I hold sacred that I think Christians do as well is I think all life is sacred. I think we should avoid harming or killing each other if we can. I'm not saying that we should be vegetarians, but I think that when we take the life of an animal, we should do it with respect and reverence. People try to complain and talk about how pagans of the past sacrificed animals. Yeah, and then they feasted on it. It was ritualistic sacrifice. It's not much different than praying over your meal to God before you have dinner. You understand that that animal lost its life, and the consumption of food is how we are to survive. It is part of the natural order, and you are thankful for everything that we're given. So you do your prayers at dinner. That's not too much different. We have evidence of animals being killed and then eaten as part of a feast afterwards. They just had a sacredness to the taking of that animal's life. There are other examples within culture where it was just ruthless ending of life and disposal of the body without consuming it. And we get that. And like I said, there's even biblical passages about that. But that's not what we do today. That's not what I believe in today. I think that type of stuff is wrong. So I'm just making it clear. It's not like I'm saying we need to be vegetarian or vegan. Some people are, and some people do take it to that extreme. With all life being sacred and having a reverence for all life, I'm pro-life. This is not how all pagans believe. I genuinely believe that abortion is murder. I think it is wrong. And I think the only exception that we should have is if the mother's life is in danger. Because I'm pro-life. I would hate to have anyone be in that scenario, and I awful thing to have to go through to make that choice. But I think it would be up to the parents that if the mother's life is in danger, they should choose whether or not they try to save their child or the mother of that child first. But aside from that exception, at the moment of conception, in my worldview, that is life. If it is unaffected and unaltered and unchanged, that will be a child, that will be a human, and I consider it to be a child at that moment. Every single one of us came into this world the same way. At the moment of conception, at the moment that that fertilization and that egg attached, that is how all of our journeys began, and we all came into this world through our mother. So to me, that sacredness should be respected and the beauty and miracle behind that. I think that meshes very well with Christian beliefs. And I know not everybody shares my sentiment for that, but I wanted to share that because there are conservative pagans who agree with me. Now, some of them have varying degrees, but I've talked to a lot of people who kind of agree that abortion is murder and wrong, and we probably shouldn't have it, with the possible exceptions. There's other exceptions. Some people will talk about exceptions of like rape and incest and stuff like that. And I'm on the fence about that because it's still a human life. What did that child do? Why would that child need to lose his life because of a horrific act that happened to the mother? I believe that the nuclear family is critical for society. Having a mother and a father in the home raising their children, I think, is critical. Part of our downfall in our society is not having that. Now, does that mean you can't have a single parent household? No. Even though I don't really think two men or two women being together is necessarily part of how nature intended us to be, I don't think it's a moral sin. I know it does through Christianity. If it's two consenting adults, I think it's their business. Leave them alone. I don't have a problem with it. The point of bringing all of this up and to share my viewpoints on some very hot topics is to let you realize we're not all the same. There's going to be people who are completely against what I'm saying here, and there's going to be some people who support it. I'm also a big pro-2A advocate. It is understanding the sacredness of all life. And if your life is threatened or the family that you are taking care of, that you are part of, is threatened, to keep their security, you prevent harm from coming to them. And sometimes that leads to the tragedy of self-defense. You take care of your family. You take care of your life. You take care of your loved ones. The biggest takeaway I want to take from this is, again, don't judge a book by its cover. We are people. We are complex. We are deep. We have all sorts of different views and visions on things. And to broad stroke paint people into a box. If you're Christian, don't think all pagans are the exact same. And if you're pagan, don't think all Christians are the exact same. Don't take the bad traumatic experiences you had from your childhood and hold people accountable for it today. Don't go back into the past and talk about, oh, there's all these witch trials and, there was the Inquisition and they're not doing it today. And if people are doing it, hold the people responsible who are doing it, not the religion or spirituality. If you take the time to talk to some neo-pagans today, you might find that a lot of them are just fun-loving nature lovers who are trying to open their mind up to the world and whatever created us. Not much different from a Christian. Sure, the approach is different. Right now, we have a split and a divide in the society of what is morally right and wrong. People are getting so angry and hurt over big topics, but it's not as simple as right versus left, Democrat versus Republican, pagan versus Christian. It's deeper than that. There are people on both sides. These big hot topic things, you will find individuals on the left who might agree with some of the things that I said that are conservative, and you'll find conservatives who disagree with it. People are individuals. Treat them as individuals. Remember at the end of the day, we're all human, and try to be human towards each other. I know this was a longer video, but this I thought was a pretty important topic. And again, seeing something like this, seeing a group of individuals painted as the bad guy, shows a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation. So I hope I cleared up some of that for some of you. Anyway, I will catch you in the next one. May your path be a fruitful one. And remember, we're all human.